In the heart of West Africa stood a kingdom that refused to kneel. Benin, rich in power, proud in tradition, and fiercely independent. While European flags swallowed Africa inch by inch, the Oba of Benin held his ground, a sovereign ruler in a land ruled by ancient law, not foreign greed. But in 1897, the British came knocking, not with respect, not with patience. They came during a sacred festival with hidden rifles and silent plans. They were warned, "Do not come. This is sacred ground. This is not your time." But they didn't listen. And deep in the forest path near a quiet village called Ugbine, Benin answered with warriors, with fire, with blood. This is the story of the ambush that lit the match. This is the Battle of Ugbine. By the late 1800s, the Benin Kingdom remained one of the last major West African powers still holding on to its independence. While many other kingdoms had fallen to British control, Benin, with its strong political system, spiritual traditions, and military discipline, continued to resist European interference. The kingdom was ruled by Oba Ovonramwen Nogbaisi, who had inherited centuries of tradition and authority. His word was law, his presence divine. Foreigners were allowed to trade, but only on Benin's terms. The Oba controlled access to goods like palm oil, ivory, and pepper, and demanded tributes before any commercial exchange. He maintained tight control over foreign traders, refusing to let Europeans move freely or make deals without royal approval. To the British, this was a problem. The British colonial authorities, especially those stationed in the Niger Coast Protectorate, saw Benin as an obstacle to free trade and imperial expansion. They wanted a more open system, one that benefited their merchants, not the Oba's court. In late 1896, a British official named James Robert Phillips, acting as the Consul General of the Protectorate, sent a letter to the Foreign Office in London proposing a bold plan: the removal of the Oba of Benin. He accused the Oba of blocking trade and oppressing his people, and recommended that Benin be brought under British rule by force if necessary. But Phillips didn't wait for approval. Confident that his proposal would be accepted and eager to gain personal glory, he organized a diplomatic mission to visit Benin City directly. On paper, it was a peaceful journey. In reality, the mission included hidden weapons, armed officers, and secret intentions. It was clear that the trip was not just about talks. It was a move to test Benin's resolve. Meanwhile, inside Benin, the kingdom was preparing for something far more important than trade. The Igue Festival, one of the most sacred periods in the Benin calendar, was approaching. It was a spiritual ceremony dedicated to renewing the Oba's power, purifying the land, and honoring the ancestors. During this time, the Oba entered a period of ritual seclusion. No wars were fought, no visitors were allowed. Even high-ranking chiefs observed silence and protocol. It was not only tradition, it was law. When word reached the Oba that a British delegation was planning to enter the city, he sent a clear message back to the British: delay the visit until the festival was over. It was not a rejection, but a firm request based on custom and religion. James Phillips received the message and ignored it. On January 2, 1897, Phillips and his delegation departed from Sapele, traveling by river and foot toward Benin City. The group consisted of 9 British officers, around 250 African porters, and several carriers and guides. They claimed to be bringing gifts to the Oba, but they also packed guns, ammunition and explosives, hidden in crates beneath the supplies. Their official goal was to reach Benin, present their case, and negotiate directly with the Oba. But internally, they were prepared for resistance and possibly even confrontation. As the British moved through the villages and forests along the route to Benin, local people grew alarmed. The movement of such a large party during a sacred festival raised suspicion. News of the approaching group quickly reached the royal court. But there was a problem. The Oba was in ritual isolation and could not be interrupted. He could not give commands, hold meetings, or even receive guests. His voice, during the Igue period, was considered sacred and untouchable. This left the responsibility of protecting the kingdom in the hands of his most trusted chiefs, including the Iyase, Prime Minister, the Ologbose, War Commander, and the Uwangwe, Chief of Protocol. They met in urgent council. The information they had was clear. A group of British men were approaching. They had ignored the Oba's instructions. They were coming with weapons during a sacred time. To the chiefs, this was not a diplomatic mission. It was an act of disrespect, possibly even an act of war. After careful discussion, they agreed. The delegation would not be allowed to reach Benin City. A decision was made to intercept them at a strategic point along the path, a place near a small forest village known as Ugbine. Located along a narrow, winding bush trail surrounded by dense forest, Ugbine offered the perfect location for an ambush. The terrain would prevent easy movement. The trees provided cover, and the British, unfamiliar with the area, would be vulnerable. Preparations began immediately. As the British marched unknowingly toward their destination, Benin warriors began to gather. They sharpened their weapons. They prayed to the gods of war, and they waited. As the British delegation advanced deeper into Benin territory, they remained unaware of the decision that had already been made in the Oba's court. The chiefs of Benin had resolved that this journey would not be completed, not during the sacred Igue Festival, and not by a group that arrived armed and uninvited. The path they followed was narrow, surrounded on both sides by dense rainforest. There were no proper roads, just bush tracks and foot trails, used by locals who understood the terrain far better than the men marching through it. Leading the British mission was James Robert Phillips, the acting Consul General of the Niger Coast Protectorate. With him were 8 other Europeans, including Captain Galway and Major Crawford. They were joined by interpreters, messengers, and over 200 African porters carrying supplies, trade goods, and hidden rifles. Despite warnings, Phillips appeared confident. He had written a letter just before departing, stating, "I am confident that the king will receive us in audience. If not, we shall continue to Benin and enforce our presence." His assumptions were dangerous. On the Benin side, Chief Ologbose, the kingdom's war commander, took charge of organizing the interception. A force of 400 to 500 warriors was quickly mobilized and dispatched to the area around Ugbine, a village surrounded by thick forest and known for its narrow paths and ambush-friendly layout. Many of the warriors were veterans. Some had fought in previous skirmishes with rebellious provinces or external rivals. Others were young men eager to defend the kingdom's honor. They were armed with spears, cutlasses, and locally made muskets. Some carried charms and amulets believed to offer spiritual protection. Unlike the British, they were familiar with the terrain. They knew every bend, every tree, and every echo in the forest. They didn't need modern weapons. They had the advantage of surprise, numbers, and home ground. Over the next 2 days, the Benin warriors dug into position along the route near Ugbine. They chose a choke point where the trail narrowed between tall trees and thick undergrowth, a perfect ambush zone. From there, they would have visibility and control over the entire passage. On the morning of January 4th, 1897, the British delegation reached the outskirts of Ugbine. They had marched through days of heat, rain, and dense bush. The porters were exhausted. The officers were focused on reaching Benin City and completing what they believed was a show of strength. A mission that would force the Oba to open trade and accept British control. They had no idea that dozens of warriors lay hidden ahead, watching silently from behind trees and in tall grass. There were no gunshots, no warnings, just the thick, humid silence of a forest waiting to explode. As the first rows of porters entered the choke point near Ugbine, birds scattered from the trees. The next moment, everything changed. Benin warriors sprang from the bush, unleashing a surprise attack on the column. They aimed not at the porters, but at the armed officers. Shots rang out, spears flew, confusion spread like wildfire. The ambush had begun. The ambush at Ugbine was swift, brutal, and decisive. As the British column entered the narrow stretch of bush path, Benin warriors struck from both sides. Hidden among the trees and thick undergrowth, they opened fire with muskets and charged with spears and cutlasses. The British officers had little time to react. The porters, unarmed and unaware, were the first to panic. Within minutes, the orderly march turned into chaos. James Phillips, the man who had planned the mission, was one of the first to fall. He was shot and killed during the initial wave of the attack. Several of the British officers around him were also struck down before they could reach for their weapons. The element of surprise had worked perfectly. Benin warriors had created a trap that the British delegation could not escape. The forest's terrain made it worse. The narrow path allowed no room for retreat or regrouping. The British did not expect such resistance, not in the form of a coordinated, disciplined ambush. In the confusion, only 2 British men survived the ambush, Alan Boisragan and Ralph Locke. Their escape would become legendary. Wounded and separated from the main group, Boisragan and Locke fled into the bush. For days, they wandered through the forest without food or clear direction, hiding from villagers and struggling to stay alive. Eventually, they made it to the coast, where they were rescued by a British patrol. Back in the forest, over 200 people lay dead. most of them African porters, caught in the middle of a conflict they didn't start. Nearly the entire British delegation had been wiped out. To the Benin Kingdom, the attack was a defensive act. The Oba had given a clear warning not to enter the city during the Igue Festival. The British had ignored that, and they came armed. The chiefs believed they had protected their land, traditions, and king from a hidden threat. But in the eyes of the British Empire, it was something else entirely. An unforgivable offense, an attack on their officials, a direct blow to colonial authority. News of the ambush reached Lagos and London within days. British newspapers published the story with anger and sensationalism, calling it a massacre and demanding swift retaliation. In Benin, however, there was no celebration. The chiefs knew what would come next. The kingdom had struck first, and the British Empire would not let that go unanswered. Within weeks, British warships were being loaded, soldiers were being assembled. A full-scale invasion was coming. The Battle of Ugbine was over, but the real destruction had not yet begun. The jungle fell silent once again. The path at Ugbine was soaked with blood, but the drums of war were only just beginning to beat. What started as an ambush would soon become an invasion. What began as a warning would end in flames, because just weeks after the attack, British warships set sail, not for peace, but for punishment. Benin had drawn first blood, but the British Empire was coming to finish it. And when they did, the kingdom would never be the same again. If this story gripped you, don't scroll just yet. Hit that like button, drop a comment with what shocked you most, and tell us if you believe Benin had a choice. Subscribe to Tales of the Ancestors and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of African history they never taught you in school. Because this is more than a story. This is our legacy.